So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the Baltic Forum. It's my first time, and thanks for listening to someone like me coming from a Mediterranean country of EU, and so bringing maybe some slightly different position from the ones that I heard so far. My first point is that my country is not only a founding country of European Union, but in a country where still there is a large majority that firmly believe in the political union, not a purely economic European Union. I'm one of those that even still talk about United States of Europe. So united foreign policy instead of divisions that are also concerning relations between Europe and Russia among the member states of Europe. It's undeniable. We have to recognize. My second point is that I remember myself some historical step where the West had tried and Russia had tried as well to reconnect and to work together for the good and the prosperity and the security of the world. I was as foreign minister of Italy in Rome, in Pratica di Mare in 2002, when President Bush and President Putin shook their hands and decided to create NATO-Russia Council, so giving the impression to overcome the dark Cold War atmosphere. And some years later, as Vice President of European Union in charge of Home Affairs and Justice, I signed, it was 2006, the EU-Russia Visa Facilitation Agreement that where Europe took the political commitment to open the way towards a visa-free regime. It was under unanimous mandate. It was only less than 10 years ago, and I was there. We are talking as we talk about a century ago, even though it was 2002 and 2006. So deterioration, mistrust, a sanction-based policy, this is the current reality. But since I speak as proudly European, I have to say a few words on what is, to me, one of the mistakes made only from European Union. Why I'm saying so? Because I said so formally and publicly as a foreign minister when in 2009 the Eastern neighborhood was established. In that occasion, when I took the floor, I said, dear colleagues, be careful. We shouldn't establish Eastern neighborhood by giving the impression, it was not the intention, but giving the impression that we are creating a new fast-track procedure for the accession to EU and maybe to accession to NATO. Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, this would be a mistake. First, because there are rules to get European acquis to become a candidate. It's not possible to have a short track to overcome the procedures, and even, I repeat, this was not the intention, but we run the risk to give the wrong impression to establish Eastern neighborhood against the Russian Federation. My prediction, unfortunately, proved true, because we had to repeat 2009, 2010, so many times. It is not our intention to have Eastern neighborhood against Russia. Be reassured. But this means that, unfortunately, in terms of communication, in terms of establishing with public declarations, this risk had been perceived. This was one of the reasons why I think mutual mistrust today is the result of action and reaction coming from both sides, not only from one. Of course, the history of today is the history of Minsk agreement. Martin said extremely right, we have to implement in full all the political and economic parts of the agreement. I know quite well, and Martin knows better than me, that we have in Europe an experience where advanced autonomy has been recognized to the minority of Italians that speak German in South Tyrol, and there were crimes, there were killings in the 60s, in the 80s, and after that we recognized to South Tyrol the special autonomy that allows South Tyrol to prosper and to grow. This would be a quite good example where in South Tyrol even local police is under control of the governor of South Tyrol instead of the control of Rome, just to give you an example of how advanced is that model that works very well. So Minsk agreement is a precondition, is not the conclusion, is the start of the process. But I believe as Italian now, having a number of geostrategic priorities that look at the south and the southeast of the European dimension, that re-engaging Russia is needed and badly needed to address together some global geostrategical challenges that is not possible to, I would say, address without involvement of Russia, and I would add of China. The two veto powers in the Security Council that sometimes feel not properly involved. And I have to recognize the thanksgiving from President Obama to President Putin after the signature of the Iran deal shows that they both were able to overcome problems and to recognize that without China and Russia fully on board, we would have never been able to sign the extremely important agreement to stop the nuclear proliferation of Iran. There are other geopolitical challenges where, on the contrary, I don't see yet the necessary re-engagement. If influenced by the Ukrainian crisis, I don't know, but anyway, we need to get a solution for Syria. And a solution for Syria is impossible if Russia is not properly involved. And I agree, involvement of Russia shouldn't mean the multiplication of military assets and escalating a military crisis that, on the contrary, should result in an international coalition to defeat the true enemies that are terrorists and to gradually move from the current regime by using elements that are not bloody hands people in the current Assad regime towards a more democratic perspective. But again, how is it possible if Russia, that is having military presence in the Tartus port in Syria, is not involved? The same applies to Egypt. Nobody talked about Egypt. We know, as Italians, we know that part of Mediterranean. Russia was, I would say, right to help the government of President Al-Sisi in a difficult moment of fragility, and now had a solid political basis of cooperation with Egypt. If Egypt fails, since they are helping the Tobruk government in Libya, the legitimated Tobruk government in Libya, we lose a great opportunity to help stabilizing Libya. And again in Libya, how is it possible to have an implementation of UN resolution in Security Council unless we have fully on board Russia and again China, to have a stabilization to avoid partition of Libya? That was the perspective we have ahead of us, as it was in the case 20 years ago of Somalia. We run the risk of repetition of Somalia crisis and Somalia situation in Libya because of abandoning Libyans to their destiny. That's not possible, but we need again Russia. We need practically involvement of Russia in fighting Daesh. How is it possible to fight Daesh without full involvement of all the global players that can help, I would say, winning what is the challenge number one, in my view, of terrorists that are threatening our civilization, not only our lives. And what about Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen? We left Afghanistan as foreign troops, but after the withdrawal, how is it possible to think about stabilizing Afghanistan and the bordering area of Pakistan without having on board all the big neighbors, including the Russian Federation? I made just some examples to explain why, in our view, from the Italian point of view, re-engagement is absolutely necessary. You know perfectly how is the opinion in my country about the sanction-based policy. The authorities, my Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister of Italy said, we accepted in spirit of loyalty to avoid to break the unity of European Union, but not because we are convinced that sanctions-based policy is the right solution in the mid-long term. The solution should be the re-engagement. And when we talk about Ukraine, in very frank way, I have to tell you what is the mood in my country, not only, I think, in my country. We had to pay a lot of money for helping Greece, and rightly so. Italy paid, only Italy, 43 billion of euro to contribute to rescue Greece in a difficult moment of crisis. And when it comes to Ukraine, what has been said by Mr. Jürgens about the crisis, the risk of collapse of Ukrainian economies is really sadly true. Is there Europe ready to put enough money to save Ukraine? Is our American friends ready to do alone what is necessary to save Ukraine? Not at all, at least so far. It seems to me from Europe quite unlikely that European member states would pay again, and it would be extremely difficult to explain to Italian taxpayers that we have to pay again for Ukraine in a moment where you are getting out of the crisis with many difficulties. What I mean, that I completely agree with the idea of trying to restore a dialogue between Eurasia Economic Community and European Economic Community on how to help together Ukraine. Ukraine is not of interest of Europe only. It is our common interest to avoid collapse, because if Ukraine economically collapses, if there is a situation where the banks and the financial institutions stop their support, what to do? This is a crisis in the middle of our geographic European continent in a broader sense. So that kind of cooperation, which is in the document that you presented, is one of the ways confirming why re-engagement is much more important than confrontation, starting from a practical, common sense and good sense interest, the interest we both, Europe and Russia have to save, to preserve the situation, the economic situation in Ukraine. My final point is the following. I think European Union on that issue, how to try to re-establish an atmosphere, positive or less negative atmosphere, is at stake. The credibility of European leadership is at stake. Of course, I'm not saying that Russia should be inactive. Also, Russia should show its goodwill to cooperate and to re-engage. But Europe has an interest, even stronger interest, to show that we are able to act as united political global player instead of presenting the position of these or that individual member states. And since I conclude as I started my presentation, I believe in the European political union. This would be a political gesture of leadership from the European point of view. I know perfectly the concerns of the countries of this region. I know perfectly the concerns of those that are in the eastern border of European Union. I know, but reassuring, helping, granting to these countries that are our friends, that we welcome in the reunification of Europe in 2004, that we are ready to help in case of need, doesn't mean to put new walls, new obstacles vis-à-vis the Russian Federation. This is the political leadership which is badly needed. And I conclude by saying I would have liked, as European, much more to see in Minsk of course, while I thank warmly President Hollande and Chancellor Merkel, I would have liked very much to see the European institutions in Minsk signing the Minsk agreement instead of two important leaders or two important member states of Europe. Because only if Europe is able to show united leadership, we can succeed. Thank you very much.